The first person to ruin Ethan Park's wedding wasn't his ex-girlfriend. It wasn't Jiwon's family. It wasn't some stranger walking through the church doors with a secret nobody was prepared to hear. It was his best friend, the man he had known since he was 13 years old. The man who had stood beside him through every bad decision, every broken relationship, every funeral, every birthday, every stupid fight that had ended with one of them pretending nothing had happened. Kang Daniel was supposed to be Ethan's best man. Everyone knew it. That was why nobody understood what they were watching when Ethan stood at the end of the long dinner table, lifted a small black box, and smiled at his oldest friend. The restaurant had been reserved for the night. Both families were there. A few close friends. Jiwon sat beside Ethan, one hand resting lightly around a glass of wine, smiling as everyone began clapping. Ethan looked happier than Daniel had seen him in years. "Before we start embarrassing ourselves with speeches," Ethan said, "there's something I need to ask." Someone immediately shouted, "We already know what it is." Laughter moved around the table. Ethan ignored them. He kept his eyes on Daniel. "For 13 years, you've been the most annoying person in my life." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "And somehow, you've survived." More laughter. Ethan smiled. "But you've also been my brother when I didn't have one." The room became quieter. Daniel's expression changed slightly. Ethan opened the black box. Inside was an expensive watch. Simple, elegant. Engraved on the back were 4 words: "My brother, my best man." For a second, Daniel didn't move. Then Ethan held the box out toward him. "So?" Daniel looked at the watch. Nobody noticed the way his fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Nobody except Jiwon. She had always been good at noticing the things people tried not to show. "Are you going to take it or cry?" Ethan asked. A few people laughed. Daniel slowly reached for the box. He closed it, then placed it back on the table. Ethan's smile faded. Daniel looked directly at him. "No." The room went silent. Ethan stared at him. "What?" Daniel didn't look away. "I said no." For a moment, Ethan actually laughed. A confused, disbelieving laugh. Very funny. "I'm not joking." Jiwon turned toward Daniel. Something about his voice had changed. Ethan's smile disappeared completely. "Daniel." Daniel took a slow breath. Then he said the words nobody at that table would forget. "I can't stand beside you while you marry her." Not like this. Suddenly there was silence. The kind that arrives so suddenly you can almost hear people breathing. Jiwon slowly put down her glass. Ethan stared at his friend, and for the first time that night, Daniel looked toward her. Only briefly. But it was enough. Enough for Ethan to notice. Enough for everyone else to begin wondering what the hell was happening. Ethan stood. "What did you just say?" Daniel pushed his chair back. "I'm sorry." "Don't do that." Daniel stopped. Ethan's voice had become quieter. More dangerous. "Don't say something like that and then apologize like we're going to move on." Daniel looked at him. For 13 years, Ethan had known every version of that face. The sarcastic Daniel, the angry Daniel, the exhausted Daniel. But he had never seen this one. This was the face Daniel made when he had already decided something was going to hurt and was preparing himself to do it anyway. "I can't be your best man," Daniel repeated. Ethan looked toward Jiwon, then back at him. "Because of her?" Daniel said nothing. That silence was worse than an answer. Jiwon's heartbeat began to rise. She didn't understand. Not really. She had known Daniel almost as long as she had known Ethan. He had always been there. Not in an intrusive way. Just there. When Ethan had forgotten to pick her up after working late, Daniel had driven 20 minutes across Seoul without complaining. When she had gotten sick during a company dinner, Daniel had been the one who remembered she couldn't take a particular painkiller. When she once mentioned that lilies made her apartment smell like hospitals, Ethan had forgotten. Daniel hadn't. At the time, she had assumed that was just who he was. Observant, thoughtful, loyal to his best friend's girlfriend because Ethan was too busy to remember the little things. But suddenly, every small memory rearranged itself. Ethan saw it happening. He saw the confusion in her face, and something inside him hardened. "Do you love her?" Jiwon's eyes widened. Daniel looked at him. The entire room stopped breathing. Ethan stepped closer. "That's why?" "Enough," Daniel said quietly. "Do you love my fiancée?" Daniel's jaw tightened. Jiwon stood. Ethan... But Ethan wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the man who had been beside him for most of his life. And Daniel finally said, "This isn't about me." Ethan laughed once, bitterly. "That's a strange answer." Daniel looked at Jiwon, then back at Ethan. And for 1 second, his expression softened. That made everything worse. Ethan picked up the black box containing the watch. "You know what?" His voice shook now, not with anger, with humiliation. "Keep it." Daniel's eyes dropped to the box. Ethan placed it back in front of him. "I don't know what game you're playing." "I'm not playing one." "Then tell me what this is." Daniel was silent. Ethan waited. Jiwon waited. Everyone waited. But Daniel only looked at him and said, "I can't." Then he walked away. He left the watch on the table. He left Ethan standing in front of everyone. And he left Jiwon with a question she hadn't even realized she was afraid to ask. Was Daniel in love with her? Neither she nor Ethan slept much that night. By morning, Ethan had convinced himself that he knew exactly what had happened. Daniel had fallen in love with Jiwon. Maybe recently. Maybe years ago. Maybe before Ethan had even noticed. And somehow, he had hidden it. The thought should have made Ethan furious. Instead, what hurt him most was that part of him wasn't surprised. He sat alone in his apartment, staring at an old photograph of himself and Daniel from university. They were younger, drunk, laughing like nothing in the world could ever come between them. His phone rang. Jiwon. He stared at her name for a few seconds before answering. "Did you sleep?" "No, me neither." Silence. Then she said, "I want to talk to him." Ethan sat up. "Why?" "Because he owes us an explanation." "He owes me an explanation." Jiwon was quiet. Then, carefully, she said, "Ethan, I think this affects me too." He closed his eyes. Of course it did. And he hated that she was right. "Don't go alone," he said. She sighed. "I wasn't asking permission." Despite everything, that almost made him smile. Almost. "You think he loves you?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Jiwon finally said, "I don't know." And somehow, those 3 words hurt more than anything Daniel had said the night before. Because Ethan suddenly realized something uncomfortable. Neither did he. 2 days later, Jiwon found Daniel sitting alone at a small cafe near the Han River. She hadn't expected him to answer her message. She definitely hadn't expected him to look as exhausted as he did. He stood when she approached. "You came?" "You asked me to." Daniel pulled out the chair across from him. Jiwon sat. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then she folded her hands together and looked directly at him. "Are you in love with me?" Daniel blinked. Of all the questions he had expected, apparently that wasn't one of them. Jiwon watched his expression carefully. He looked almost offended, then tired, then, strangely, sad. "Why would you ask me that?" She laughed softly. "Seriously?" Daniel said nothing. "You refused to be his best man because he was marrying me." "That's not what I said." "It's exactly what you said." "No, I said I couldn't stand beside him while he married you." Jiwon stared at him. "Do you hear how that sounds?" Daniel leaned back. "Unfortunately." "Then explain it." "I can't." She shook her head. "No, you don't get to do that again." Daniel looked at her. Jiwon's voice softened. "You've been acting strange for months." His eyes narrowed slightly. "I have?" "Yes." "You've just never noticed." That stopped her. "What does that mean?" Daniel looked out the window. For a moment, she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "It means you've always had a habit of assuming things are simpler than they are." Jiwon stared at him. "Is that supposed to help?" "No." "Then why do you care so much?" Daniel finally looked back at her. And something in his face changed. Not romance, not longing. Something heavier. Something that looked almost like guilt. "Because," he said quietly, "I was there before you knew who he was." Jiwon froze. The words didn't make sense. She searched his face for a joke. There wasn't one. "What?" But Daniel was already standing. "Daniel." He reached for his coat. "What do you mean?" He looked down at her. And for the first time, Jiwon saw something close to fear in his eyes. "I mean, you should ask Ethan what he remembers." Then he walked away. Jiwon sat alone at the table long after he was gone. Because there was something about the way he had said it. Not what Ethan knows, what he remembers. And suddenly, for reasons she couldn't explain, a cold feeling moved slowly through her chest. She did not call Ethan immediately. Instead, she went to Daniel's younger sister. That decision would change everything. Daniel's sister, Sua, was the one person who could never keep a secret when she thought someone else had already told it. When Jiwon arrived at her apartment, Sua smiled and hugged her. It then noticed her face. What happened? Jiwon hesitated. Can I ask you something strange? Sua immediately sat down.
This sounds bad. Tell me everything. How long have you known me? Sua frowned. What? Daniel said something yesterday. The smile disappeared. Jiwon noticed. That was enough. Sua stood too quickly. I don't think you should be asking me that. Jiwon's stomach dropped. So you do know something? No. Sua. She looked toward the hallway. Then back at Jiwon. And that was when Jiwon saw it. A photograph hanging beside the bookshelf. 3 people standing outside what looked like a university festival. Daniel, Ethan, and her. Jiwon walked toward it slowly. Her hands began to shake. She was younger. Her hair was shorter. She was smiling. Ethan had his arm around Daniel's shoulders. And Daniel. Daniel was looking directly at her. Not lovingly. Not secretly. Just knowingly. Like all 3 of them belonged in the same moment. Jiwon reached for the photograph. What is this? Behind her, Sua whispered. You don't remember. Jiwon turned. What do you mean, I don't remember? Sua closed her eyes. And Jiwon suddenly understood. There was a period of her life she had never been able to fully remember. Months. Fragments. A hospital room. A terrible headache. Her mother's hand. Someone crying beside her bed. But whenever she tried to hold on to the memories, they disappeared. Her doctor had called it trauma. Her family had called it recovery. Jiwon had learned not to question it. Until now. She picked up the photograph. Who's there? Sua looked terrified. Jiwon. Who's this? And when Sua finally answered, the world Jiwon thought she knew began to come apart. You. Jiwon's eyes filled with tears. With Ethan and Daniel. The photograph slipped from her fingers. And somewhere across Seoul, Ethan was sitting alone in his apartment, staring at his phone. He knew exactly what Daniel had meant. Ask Ethan what he remembers. Because there was something Ethan had spent 6 years trying not to remember. And the closer Jiwon came to finding it, the closer he came to losing her all over again. Ethan knew exactly where Jiwon would go next. Not because he was watching her. Not because Daniel had told him. But because there was only one place left. The hospital. 6 years earlier, Jiwon had spent almost 3 weeks there. Ethan still remembered every detail. The smell of antiseptic that clung to his clothes after visiting her. The sound of machines in the middle of the night. The coffee Daniel kept bringing him because he had stopped sleeping. And the moment Jiwon had opened her eyes, looked directly at him, and asked, Who are you? Ethan had spent 6 years pretending that moment hadn't destroyed him. Now it was waiting for him again. His phone rang. It was Daniel. Ethan stared at the screen. Then answered. Where is she? Daniel didn't respond immediately. That silence told Ethan everything. You told her. No. Daniel. I told her to ask you. Ethan stood. His hand tightened around the phone. She's going to remember. Daniel's voice was low. I hope she does. Ethan closed his eyes. You don't understand. For the first time since the dinner, Daniel's voice cracked. Don't I? Ethan said nothing. Daniel continued. I was there, Ethan. The words hit him harder than he expected. I watched you sit outside that hospital room for 6 hours because you were afraid to go in. Ethan swallowed. I watched you leave flowers outside her door because her mother wouldn't let you see her. Stop. And I watched you convince yourself that leaving was the same thing as letting her heal. I said stop. Daniel went quiet. Then he said something Ethan wasn't prepared for. You don't get to act like I ruined your life because I refused to help you hide it. Ethan hung up. For several seconds, he stood completely still. Then he grabbed his keys and left. Ji-won didn't go to the hospital. At least, not immediately. She went home. She locked the door. Then took the photograph out of her bag. She placed it on the table. 3 people smiling. 3 people connected by a memory she no longer owned. Her phone buzzed. A message from her mother. Are you okay? Ji-won stared at it. Then typed. Did you know Ethan before the accident? The typing bubble appeared. Stopped, appeared again. Then disappeared. Ji-won's heart began beating faster. She called. Her mother answered after the 3rd ring. Ji-won. Did you know? Her mom didn't answer. Mom. Her mother sighed. And suddenly sounded older than she had that morning. Where are you? Did you know? Ji-won, please. That was when she knew. She sank slowly into a chair. You did. Her mother's voice broke. We were trying to protect you. From what? Another silence. Ji-won laughed. But there was no humor in it. That's the problem, isn't it? Everybody keeps saying they were protecting me. Her mother didn't answer. Ji-won looked down at the photograph. I don't remember him. I know. Was I in love with Ethan? Her mother began crying. And somehow, that hurt more than the answer. Mom. Yes. Ji-won stopped breathing. For a moment, the apartment seemed to disappear around her. She stared at Ethan's face in the photograph. Her fiancé. The man she was supposed to marry. The man who had apparently loved her before. Lost her. And then somehow found her again. How long? Her mother whispered. It wasn't very long. Ji-won closed her eyes. But it was real. Her mother didn't answer. Ji-won already knew. Tell me everything. No. Her eyes opened. What? You need to talk to Ethan. Ji-won's face hardened. Why? Because it's his story too. Ji-won stood. No. Her voice shook. It was my life. Her mother began crying harder. Ji-won didn't care. Not anymore. For 6 years, all of you have decided what I could handle. Daniel decided what I should know. Ethan decided what I didn't need to remember. You decided what I was allowed to hear. Ji-won. No. She hung up. For the first time since Daniel had refused to be best man, Ji-won stopped wondering whether he loved her. That question no longer mattered. A much more frightening one had taken its place. How much of her own life had been happening without her? She went to see Ethan that evening. He opened the door before she knocked twice. For 1 second, neither of them spoke. Then Ji-won held up the photograph. Ethan looked at it. His entire face changed. Not surprise. Recognition. Fear. Ji-won felt something inside her collapse. You knew. Ethan stepped back. Come in. No. Ji-won. How long have you known? He looked at her. She repeated herself. How long have you known who I was? Ethan's eyes filled. And that terrified her. Because Ethan didn't cry easily. From the beginning. She stared at him. The beginning of what? When we met again. Ji-won laughed softly. Her hands were shaking now. When we met again. Ethan nodded. And you didn't tell me? I tried. No. Her voice rose. You didn't. He flinched. Ji-won noticed. Good. You asked me to marry you. I know. You stood in front of both our families and told them you wanted to spend the rest of your life with me. I know. And you never once thought I deserved to know that I had apparently spent part of my life with you already? Ethan looked away. That was the wrong thing to do. Ji-won's eyes filled with tears. Oh my God. Ji-won. Don't. She stepped backward. You don't get to say my name like that. His face broke. And for a second, she hated herself for seeing it. Then she remembered something Daniel had said. You should ask Ethan what he remembers. So she did. What happened? Ethan looked at her. She held the photograph between them. Tell me what happened. He sat down slowly. Ji-won remained standing. Ethan rubbed his hands together. A nervous habit. She had seen him do it before job interviews. Before meeting her parents. Before proposing. She had never seen him do it like this. I met you 7 years ago. Ji-won said nothing. It was at a university festival. She looked down at the photograph. Daniel introduced us. Yes. Why don't I remember? Ethan closed his eyes. And that was when she knew whatever he was about to say would hurt. Because at the time, we barely knew each other. Ji-won frowned. What? You and I didn't start dating then. She stared at him. Ethan continued. We met. We liked each other. A small, painful smile appeared. You hated the coffee I bought you. Despite herself, something flickered inside her. Not a memory. Just an image. A paper cup. A man's laugh. Then it was gone. Ethan noticed her expression. You remember? No. The hope disappeared from his face. Ji-won looked at him. So what happened? Ethan took a long breath. Nothing. She frowned. Nothing? That's what I mean. His voice was full of something she couldn't name. Nothing happened because I walked away. Why? He looked toward the window. Because Daniel told me I wasn't ready. Ji-won froze. What? Ethan looked back at her. He said I was still carrying too much from my last relationship. That I was lonely. That I didn't know whether I liked you, or just liked how you made me feel. Ji-won swallowed. And he was right. She hadn't expected that. Ethan continued. So I left you alone. The words sat between them. Ji-won looked at the photograph again, then back at him. But Daniel said he was there before I knew who you were. Ethan's face changed. Ji-won noticed. What does that mean? Ethan stood. Daniel knew you before I did. How? He met you through university. And he didn't tell me? No. Why? Ethan looked exhausted. Because after everything that happened, none of us knew what you remembered. Ji-won's patience broke. Then stop saying everything. Her voice echoed through the apartment. Stop talking like I'm supposed to understand a story that everyone else already knows. Ethan went quiet. Ji-won's chest rose and fell quickly. Then more quietly she said, Tell me about the accident. Ethan looked at her. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't. Then he walked toward a drawer beside his desk. He opened it. Inside was a small wooden box. Ji-won watched him take it out. His hands were trembling. He placed it on the table. I haven't opened this in 6 years. She looked at him. What's inside? Ethan sat. Then slowly opened the box. There were photographs. Old movie tickets. A dried flower. A bracelet. And underneath everything else, a hospital visitor's pass. Ji-won picked it up. Her name was printed on it. Her breath caught. Ethan's name was handwritten underneath. She looked at him. And for the first time, Ethan stopped trying to protect her from the truth. 6 years ago, I found you again. Ji-won didn't move. Ethan's voice became quieter. You had already graduated. I had just started working. I saw you in a bookstore. Her eyes filled. You recognized me? Immediately. And I recognized you? He smiled sadly. Not at first. Ji-won looked down. But eventually? Yes. His smile disappeared. And this time, I didn't walk away. Something inside her tightened. Ethan took the photograph from her hand. We started slowly. His fingers moved over the edge. Coffee. Dinner. Walking home together. He looked at her. You told me you hated when people rushed things. Ji-won felt another strange flicker. Rain against glass. A man's hand holding an umbrella. Again gone. Ethan noticed her. But this time, he didn't ask if she remembered. He continued. I fell in love with you. Ji-won's breath caught. He smiled weakly. And this time you let me. The room became quiet. For a few seconds, Ji-won allowed herself to imagine it. A version of herself who knew him. Who loved him. Who had laughed with him. Who had built something with him before the woman standing here had ever existed. Then she asked the question she was afraid of. What happened? Ethan's eyes closed. And when he opened them, they were wet. The accident. Ji-won sat down. He had never said those words to her like this before. Not with this much weight. She had known she had been in an accident. Everyone knew that. But until now, she had never understood that Ethan was part of the life she had lost. It was raining, he said. Ji-won went still. Another flicker. Headlights. A scream. Glass. Her hand moved to her temple. Ethan immediately noticed. Are you okay? She looked at him. Don't. He stopped. She breathed slowly. Then whispered, Keep going. Ethan looked terrified. But he obeyed. You were driving home from work. Where were you? At my apartment. Did we fight? Ethan shook his head. No. Then why do I feel like... She stopped. Ethan waited. Ji-won's eyes filled. Like I was trying to get somewhere. Ethan looked down. Because you were. Her heartbeat slowed. Where? He didn't answer. Ji-won stared at him. Ethan. He finally looked up. To me. And suddenly, for the first time that evening, Ji-won remembered something. Not clearly. Not enough to understand. But enough. Her own voice. Laughing through a phone. I'm almost there. Then headlights. A horn. Darkness. Ji-won covered her mouth. Ethan moved instinctively toward her. She immediately held up her hand. He stopped. The distance between them felt unbearable. I was coming to see you. Yes. Her voice broke. And then? Ethan looked at the hospital pass in her hand. Then you woke up 3 days later. Ji-won's tears fell. And I didn't remember you. Ethan nodded. She couldn't breathe. What did I say? He looked away. She already knew. Still, she asked. What did I say when I saw you? Ethan was silent for so long that she thought he might refuse. Then he whispered. You asked who I was. Ji-won looked down. The apartment blurred through her tears. Ethan continued. I thought it would come back. His voice broke. The doctor said it might. She wiped her face. And it didn't. Did you stay? Ethan's expression changed. Ji-won looked up. Did you stay? And suddenly, she understood that this was the question Daniel had wanted her to ask. Not whether Ethan loved her. Not whether Daniel did. This. What happened after she forgot him? Ethan looked at her for a long time. Then quietly said, no. Ji-won went completely still. And somewhere deep inside her, beneath the grief and confusion and memories that were beginning to move like shadows behind a locked door, something colder began to form. Because love was one thing. Forgetting was another. But leaving was a choice. And for the first time, Ji-won wondered whether the accident was really the worst thing that had happened to her, or whether the worst thing had happened afterward. Ji-won stared at Ethan. No. The word barely came out. Ethan's face tightened. Ji-won. You left. It wasn't a question. He looked down. And somehow, that was worse than if he had tried to defend himself. She stood slowly. The hospital visitor's pass was still in her hand. 6 years old. Her name. His name. Proof that there had once been a version of her who had trusted him enough to drive through the rain just to see him. You said you loved me. I did. And when I woke up and didn't remember you. Ethan closed his eyes. She felt her throat tighten. You left. It wasn't that simple. Ji-won laughed. A small, broken sound. Of course it wasn't. He looked up. Your mother asked me to give you time. My mother? She thought seeing me was making things worse. Ji-won froze. What? Ethan hesitated. And she immediately knew there was more. Tell me. Ji-won. Stop deciding what I can handle. The words came out louder than she intended. Ethan went silent. For a second, neither of them moved. Then she took a breath. Slower this time. Start again. He looked at her. She wiped her face. From the day I woke up. Ethan sat down. He looked suddenly exhausted. As if 6 years had finally caught up with him. When you woke up, you recognized your mother. Ji-won remained standing. You recognized your brother. A few friends. His eyes dropped. But not me. She looked at the floor. The doctors said memory loss after trauma could be temporary. And you waited. Yes. How long? 3 weeks. Ji-won looked up. Something in his voice made her stomach turn. Then what? Ethan swallowed. Then you started getting worse. She frowned. What do you mean? Every time I came into the room, you became anxious. Ji-won stared at him. What? You didn't know why I was there. His voice cracked slightly. You thought I was someone your family hadn't told you about. She slowly sat down across from him. Ethan continued. You kept asking your mother why I looked at you like I knew you. Her breath caught. And she told me. He stopped. Ji-won's fingers tightened around the visitor's pass. She told you what? Ethan looked at her. And for the first time, there was something close to anger in his expression. Not toward her. Toward himself. She told me to stop coming. The room went completely quiet. Ji-won blinked. You listened? I thought it was what you needed. No. Her voice was barely above a whisper. You thought it was what was easiest. Ethan flinched. She stood again. You were scared. Yes. The honesty stopped her. Ethan looked at her. I was terrified. Ji-won stared at him. I didn't know how to watch you look at me like I was a stranger. Tears filled her eyes again. But I was. I know. Then why did you leave? Because every time I walked into that room, I hoped you would remember me. His voice broke. And every time you didn't. He looked away. I started feeling like I was taking something from you. Ji-won didn't understand. What? Your peace. She shook her head. That wasn't your decision. I know. Then why are you saying it like it was noble? I don't think it was noble. That made her pause. Ethan looked back at her. I think I was weak. The apartment was silent. Ji-won hadn't expected him to say that. She had been prepared to fight him. To accuse him. To watch him defend himself until she hated him enough to walk away. But there was no defense. Just regret. And somehow, that made it harder. She looked down at the visitor's pass. So you disappeared. Yes. And then what? Ethan's expression changed again. Ji-won noticed. There was someone else. His eyes met hers. Daniel. She went still. What about him? Ethan leaned back. For the first few days, he came with me. Ji-won said nothing. When your mother asked me to stop visiting, Daniel told me not to argue. Her eyes narrowed. Daniel told you to leave? Yes. The answer hit harder than she expected. Ethan continued. He said if being there was hurting you, I had to stop thinking about myself. Ji-won's chest tightened. And did he? Did he what? Leave. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. No. Ji-won's heartbeat changed. What do you mean? Daniel kept visiting. She stared at him. Ethan continued. Not every day. Not at first. But eventually, yes. Why? I asked him the same thing. And? Ethan looked toward the photograph still lying on the table. He said someone should make sure you weren't alone. Ji-won felt cold. She thought about the photograph. Daniel's face. The way he had looked at her. Not like someone in love. Like someone remembering something she couldn't. You knew? Yes. You knew Daniel stayed. Yes. And you were okay with that? No. His answer surprised her. I hated it. Ji-won stared. Ethan laughed bitterly. Every time he came back and told me you'd asked about your recovery, or what the doctor said, I hated him for knowing things I didn't. Then why didn't you go? Ethan's jaw tightened. Because you never asked for me. The words landed heavily. Ji-won looked away. Ethan stood. He walked toward the window but didn't look outside. You asked for your mother. His voice was quiet. Your brother. Your friends. He swallowed. But never me. Ji-won didn't know what to say. After a while, she whispered. I didn't know who you were. I know. Then how could I ask? Ethan turned around. You couldn't. His face softened. That was the whole problem. Ji-won looked down. For the first time, the anger inside her became tangled with something else. A question. What happened after I left the hospital? Ethan didn't answer immediately. She looked up. Ethan. You went home. I know that. You started therapy. I know that too. He nodded. Then Daniel stopped telling me things. Ji-won frowned. What? He said I needed to move on. Her expression changed. And you listened? I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice. Ethan smiled sadly. Not when the only person who knows what she's doing is the one person who no longer knows you. The words stayed with her. Ji-won looked at the old photograph. Something wasn't right. Daniel had told her to ask Ethan what he remembered. Ethan had told her Daniel stayed. Both of them seemed to be telling the truth. But neither of them was telling the whole truth. She suddenly remembered something Soo-ah had said. Not exactly. Just the look on her face. The fear. As if the photograph wasn't the thing Ji-won was supposed to find. As if there was something else. Something worse. Ji-won picked up her phone. Ethan watched her. Who are you calling? Soo-ah. Ethan's face changed immediately. And Ji-won noticed. What? Nothing. You know. Ji-won. You know what she's hiding. Ethan didn't answer. Her anger returned instantly. Oh, unbelievable. She stood. Do all of you have meetings about which parts of my life I'm allowed to know? It's not like that. Then tell me. Ethan walked toward her. I can't. She laughed. Of course. Of course he couldn't. Why? Ethan looked directly at her. And when he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I don't know if Daniel has the right to tell you either. Ji-won froze. The sentence didn't make sense. What? Ethan looked away. And then she understood. Whatever Daniel was hiding, it wasn't just Ethan's secret. It belonged to him too. Her phone began ringing. Soo-ah. Ji-won answered immediately. Tell me the truth. There was silence. Then Soo-ah whispered. Where are you? That doesn't matter. Is Ethan with you? Ji-won looked at him. Yes. Soo-ah went quiet. Ji-won's stomach dropped. Why does that matter? Ji-won. Tell me. Soo-ah took a breath. Then said something that made Ji-won forget how to breathe. Because Daniel didn't just visit you after the accident. Ji-won's fingers tightened around the phone. What do you mean? Ethan closed his eyes. As if he already knew what was coming. Soo-ah continued. He was there that night. Ji-won looked toward Ethan. Ethan looked devastated. She whispered. At the accident? No. Soo-ah's voice broke. Before it. Ji-won's heart stopped. And suddenly, Ethan moved. Ji-won, don't. But she held up her hand. Her entire body had gone still. She could hear Soo-ah breathing on the other end. What happened? Ji-won whispered. Soo-ah didn't answer. Instead, someone took the phone from her. Ji-won's eyes widened. Daniel. Where are you? Ji-won's voice changed. It was no longer angry. It was shaking. Why were you there? Daniel was silent. Daniel. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. Because you weren't driving to Ethan. Ji-won froze. The apartment seemed to tilt around her. What? Ethan's face drained of color. Daniel continued. You were coming to see me. Ji-won stared into nothing. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. Then, from somewhere behind her, Ethan whispered. No. Ji-won turned toward him. He looked at the floor. Like the one thing he had spent years refusing to believe had finally been spoken aloud. Ji-won's voice broke. Why was I coming to see you? On the phone, Daniel said nothing. That silence was different. Not hesitation. Pain. Ji-won pressed the phone harder against her ear. Daniel. And finally, he answered. You were coming to tell me something. The entire world seemed to hold its breath. What? Daniel took a long, shaking breath. You had found out why Ethan walked away from you the first time. Ji-won stared at Ethan. His face went completely still. And Daniel whispered. You wanted to know if I already knew. Ji-won stared at Ethan. Then at the phone in her hand. Daniel's voice was still there. Quiet. Waiting. You wanted to know if I already knew. Ji-won's throat tightened. Knew what? Daniel didn't answer. Daniel. Ethan turned away. That was enough. Ji-won looked at him. Slowly. Painfully. You know. Ethan remained silent. Her voice rose. What did I find out? Daniel spoke first. 6 years ago, when Ethan met you for the first time, you liked him. Ji-won closed her eyes. I know that much. But you didn't know why he disappeared. She opened them again. Ethan's face had changed. Daniel continued. You thought he lost interest. Ji-won's chest tightened. Didn't he? No. The answer came from Ethan. Ji-won looked at him. He was still staring at the floor. No, he repeated. I didn't. Then why did you leave? Ethan said nothing. Ji-won let out a breath that shook. Of course. Daniel's voice came through the phone again. Ethan was still getting over someone. Ji-won frowned. What? A woman he had been with before. She looked at Ethan. And when I introduced you two, I knew you liked each other. Ji-won went still. But I also knew Ethan wasn't ready. Ethan finally looked up. Daniel. Don't. Daniel's voice was sharper now. You've had 6 years to tell her. Ji-won listened without moving. Daniel continued. I told him not to start something with you, if he was only lonely. Her stomach dropped. He walked away. Ethan closed his eyes. Ji-won whispered. You told him to leave me? Daniel was quiet. I told him not to use you to fill a space someone else had left. The words hit harder than she expected. Ji-won looked toward Ethan. And you listened? Yes. The answer was immediate and honest. Her eyes filled. So you just disappeared. I thought I was doing the right thing. For who? Ethan didn't answer. Ji-won laughed bitterly. That seems to be everyone's favorite sentence. Daniel went quiet. Ji-won pressed the phone closer to her ear. So what did I discover? This time, neither man answered. Her heart began to race. Daniel. You found my old messages. She froze. What messages? Daniel took a breath. The messages between me and Ethan. Ji-won's eyes narrowed. About me? Yes. Ethan stepped forward. Ji-won, it wasn't. She raised her hand. He stopped. What did they say? Daniel was silent. Then Ethan whispered. I told him I was scared. Ji-won looked at him. Scared of what? Ethan swallowed. That I was going to hurt you. She stared. And Daniel? Daniel answered quietly. I told him that if he cared about you, he should leave you alone until he knew what he wanted. Ji-won's fingers tightened around the phone. And you did? Yes. She laughed again. This time, tears ran down her face. So that was it. No, Daniel said. Her expression changed. What do you mean? There was another message. Ethan's head snapped toward the phone. Daniel. Ji-won looked at him. What message? Daniel was quiet for so long she thought the call had ended. Then he said, Ethan told me he had fallen in love with you anyway. The room went silent. Ji-won's breathing stopped. She looked at Ethan. His face gave her the answer before he spoke. You loved me. Yes. Back then. Yes. And you still left. Ethan's voice broke. Yes. Ji-won stared at him. Something inside her began to collapse. Not because she had discovered that Ethan had once loved her, but because he had loved her. and still decided she wasn't worth staying for. You were afraid you would hurt me, she whispered. Ethan nodded. So you hurt me instead. He closed his eyes. Yes. The honesty should have made her angrier. Instead, it left her exhausted. She sank into the nearest chair. Daniel's voice softened. That was why you called me. Ji-won looked down. What? The night of the accident. You found the messages. Her chest tightened. You called me crying. For 1 second, something flickered inside her. Her own voice. Broken. Angry. A man's breathing on the other end of a phone. Then it disappeared. Ji-won pressed her fingers against her temple. Daniel continued. You asked me if I knew. Knew that he loved me? Yes. She looked at Ethan. And did you? Daniel didn't answer. Ji-won already knew. You did. Yes. Her eyes closed. Of course. Of course he knew. All those years. Daniel had known Ethan loved her. He had known Ethan walked away. He had known she discovered the truth. And somehow, he had stayed silent. Why didn't you tell me? Daniel's voice broke slightly. Because you never remembered asking me. Ji-won went completely still. And when you lost your memory? He stopped. When I lost my memory, what? Daniel inhaled slowly. I thought the past was over. Ji-won's eyes filled again. She looked at Ethan. Then at nothing. You all decided that. No, Daniel said quietly. Ji-won shook her head. You all decided what I needed. Daniel said nothing. And suddenly, her voice hardened. What happened after I called you? Daniel hesitated. Tell me. You wanted to see me. Why? To ask me one question in person. Her heartbeat quickened. What question? Daniel was silent. Daniel. His answer came quietly. You wanted to know if I ever thought Ethan would come back for you. Ji-won's breath caught. Ethan turned toward the wall. She barely noticed. Her entire body had gone cold. And? Daniel didn't answer. Ji-won's voice became smaller. What did you tell me? There was a long silence. Then Daniel whispered. I told you I didn't know. A tear slid down Ji-won's face. But I also told you something else. She waited. I told you Ethan had loved you. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut. And? Daniel's voice broke. I told you that sometimes loving someone doesn't mean you're brave enough to keep them. The room seemed to disappear around her. For a second she saw it. Rain on a windshield. Street lights. Her hands gripping the steering wheel. Her phone sitting in the passenger seat. Her own voice through tears. Then, a horn. Ji-won gasped. The phone fell from her hand. Ethan moved toward her. Ji-won. She stumbled backward. Don't touch me. He stopped immediately. Her breathing became uneven. I remember. Both men went silent. Ji-won pressed her hands against her head. Not everything. Just fragments. But enough. I was crying. Ethan didn't move. I was angry. Daniel whispered through the phone. Yes. She looked at Ethan. I wasn't driving to see you. No. I was driving to Daniel. Ethan's face broke. Ji-won's knees weakened. She reached for the table. And suddenly, she remembered something else. Not the accident. The phone call. Her own voice. You knew. Daniel saying her name. Her screaming. You knew he loved me, and you still helped him leave. Ji-won's breath caught. Daniel was silent. She stared at the phone on the floor. Then slowly picked it up. You did help him. Daniel didn't deny it. You helped him leave me. I thought I was protecting you. Ji-won laughed through her tears. Again. She looked toward Ethan. Then back at the phone. That's what everyone says. Daniel's voice softened. Ji-won. No. She wiped her face. You don't get to say my name like you were the only one who stayed. That hurt him. She could hear it. Good. You knew what he did. Yes. You knew I was hurt. Yes. You knew he loved me. Yes. And you still told him to leave. Daniel took a breath. Yes. She closed her eyes. For the first time since the dinner, Ji-won felt the truth settle inside her. Daniel hadn't been protecting her from Ethan. Not completely. He had also been protecting Ethan from the consequences of what he'd done. She whispered. You both betrayed me. Neither man argued. And that was when Ji-won finally understood why Daniel had refused to stand beside Ethan. It wasn't because he had suddenly discovered the truth. He had known the truth all along. He was refusing now because this time, Ethan was about to marry her without telling her any of it. Ji-won looked at Ethan. You were going to let me marry you. His eyes filled. Yes. And when were you planning to tell me? He said nothing. She laughed. After the wedding? No. After we had children? G1. Then when? His voice cracked. I don't know. There it was. The truth. Not a noble reason. Not a carefully planned explanation. Just fear. He had no idea when he was going to tell her. Because some part of him had hoped he never would have to. G1 picked up her bag. Ethan stepped forward. Where are you going? She looked at him. And suddenly, Ethan didn't look like the man she was supposed to marry. He looked like a stranger who had somehow known her 3 different times. And failed her every single time. I don't know. Her voice was quiet. But I know I'm not marrying you. Ethan went still. G1's tears filled again. Not because she didn't love him. That was the cruelest part. She did. The woman standing there loved him. Even if she couldn't remember the women who had loved him before. But she couldn't marry a man while wondering whether she knew the whole truth about him. She walked toward the door. G1. She stopped. Ethan's voice shook. I loved you. She closed her eyes. I know. Then she looked back at him. You've loved me 3 times. His face changed. And every single time, you let fear decide what happened next. She opened the door. Ethan didn't follow. He knew better this time. G1 walked out. She didn't go to Daniel. She didn't go home. She booked a small hotel room across the city and turned off her phone. For 3 days, neither man knew where she was. And for the first time in years, G1 was alone with her own story. No Ethan. No Daniel. No mother telling her what was best. No doctor explaining what she might remember. No fiancé waiting for forgiveness. No best friend carrying secrets. Just her. And the frightening realization that she didn't know which parts of herself had been real. And which parts had been built from things everyone else had chosen not to tell her. On the 4th day, she returned to her apartment. There was a letter waiting outside her door. No name. But she recognized the handwriting immediately. Daniel. She stood there for a long time before opening it. Inside, there was only one sentence. I was wrong too. And underneath it, if you ever want the whole truth, I'll tell you everything. Even the parts that make you hate me. G1 read Daniel's letter 3 times. The first time, she was angry. The second time, she was curious. By the 3rd, she was tired of being afraid of the truth. So she called him. Daniel answered immediately. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then G1 said, everything. Daniel went quiet. She stood by the window of her apartment, looking down at the street below. You said you would tell me everything. I will. No protecting me. I know. No deciding what I can handle. I know. And no leaving out the parts that make you look bad. Daniel let out a slow breath. Those are probably the worst parts. G1 closed her eyes. Good. They met that evening. Not at Daniel's apartment. Not somewhere private. G1 chose a quiet cafe near the river. Public. Neutral. Somewhere she could leave whenever she wanted. Daniel arrived first. He was sitting near the window when she walked in. For a moment, G1 remembered what she had thought of him before all of this. Reliable. Quiet. Ethan's best friend. The man who always seemed to know what to do. Now she wasn't sure she knew who he was either. She sat across from him. Daniel didn't smile. I don't expect you to forgive me. Good. He nodded. G1 folded her hands. Start with the first time. Daniel looked toward the river. I met you before Ethan did. She waited. It was during university. Were we friends? Yes. G1 frowned. Just friends. Daniel looked back at her. Yes. There was something almost defensive in his voice. She noticed. Did you love me? Daniel's expression changed. Not because the answer was difficult. Because the question itself hurt. No. G1 held his gaze. Not then. Not now. A long silence passed. Then Daniel said, no. She believed him. And strangely, that made the story sadder. Because if Daniel hadn't been secretly waiting to take Ethan's place, then he had destroyed all of this for a reason that was somehow even more complicated. You knew I liked Ethan. Yes. And you introduced us. Yes. Why? Daniel smiled faintly. You wouldn't stop talking about him. G1 blinked. What? You saw him once at a student event. A small laugh escaped him. You spent 10 minutes pretending you didn't care. She stared at him. Apparently, I wasn't very convincing. You were terrible. For the first time in days, G1 almost smiled. Then it disappeared. What happened? Daniel's face became serious again. Ethan liked you. I know. But I knew him better than you did. Ji-won waited. He had just come out of a bad relationship. Daniel looked down at his hands. Not the kind where someone simply breaks up and moves on. It destroyed him. Ji-won said nothing. He stopped trusting himself around people. Every woman after that became either someone he pushed away. Daniel paused. Or someone he became afraid of needing. Ji-won's throat tightened. And you thought I would become that. I was afraid you would. She looked at him. So you told him to leave? Yes. Daniel didn't hesitate this time. And he listened. Yes. Did you tell him I liked him? Daniel's eyes moved toward hers. Yes. Ji-won laughed bitterly. So you knew I was going to get hurt. I thought you would get hurt more if he stayed. But you didn't ask me. No. The answer was quiet. Honest. Ji-won looked away. Daniel continued. That was the first thing I did wrong. She turned back. The first. His face tightened. There were more. Of course there were. Ji-won leaned back. Keep going. Daniel took a breath. After Ethan left, I stayed friends with you. Ji-won frowned. I don't remember that. You shouldn't. The words landed strangely. It happened before the accident. She went still. Daniel continued. You were angry with Ethan for a while. How long? Months. And you knew why he left? Yes. Ji-won's face hardened. Did you tell me? No. Why? Daniel looked directly at her. Because Ethan asked me not to. She laughed. Of course he did. But that wasn't an excuse. Her expression changed. Daniel shook his head. I should have told you. Yes. I know. The cafe became quiet. Outside, the sky was beginning to darken. Ji-won suddenly asked. Did Ethan ever try to come back? Daniel's expression changed. And she knew. He did. Daniel nodded. When? Several times. Her chest tightened. What happened? He would write messages. Ji-won stared. Messages? Yes. He never sent them. Why? Daniel looked down. Because he kept asking me if it was selfish. Ji-won's face went cold. And what did you tell him? Daniel didn't answer. Her voice sharpened. What did you tell him? I told him to leave you alone. Ji-won stared at him. He continued. Again. She looked down at the table. For years, she had believed Ethan had simply disappeared. Then she discovered he had loved her. Now she was discovering that he had wanted to come back. And Daniel had helped convince him not to. You really thought you were protecting me? Yes. And you never once considered that maybe I should have been allowed to decide whether I wanted him? Daniel's eyes filled slightly. No. Ji-won looked up. No. He shook his head. I didn't consider it enough. She stared at him. That answer hurt because it was true. Daniel hadn't hated her. He hadn't wanted her for himself. He had simply believed he knew what was best. And he had been wrong. Then Daniel reached into his coat. Ji-won's body tensed. He placed a small envelope on the table. I found these after you called me that night. She stared at it. What are they? The messages. Ji-won didn't touch them. Daniel continued. The ones between me and Ethan. Her heartbeat changed. Why do you still have them? I don't know. Yes, you do. He looked at her. Ji-won held his gaze. Why? Daniel's voice dropped. Because I never forgave myself for what I did. She looked at the envelope. Then slowly opened it. There were printed messages. Dozens of them. At first, they were ordinary. Daniel asking Ethan if he had spoken to her. Ethan saying no. Then the messages changed. Ethan, I think about calling her every day. Ji-won's fingers froze. Another message. Daniel, missing someone doesn't mean you're ready for them. Then, Ethan, I don't know how to stop loving her. Ji-won's breath caught. She kept reading. And finally, Ethan, if I go back, what if I hurt her again? Daniel's response came underneath. Then don't go back until you know you won't. Ji-won closed her eyes. She could suddenly see it. Two clueless men, both deciding that her feelings were too dangerous to involve. She opened her eyes. What happened after I found these? Daniel's face changed. The night of the accident? Yes. You called me. I know. You were furious. I remember pieces. Daniel nodded. You said you didn't care anymore why Ethan had left. Ji-won frowned. That doesn't sound like me. You were crying. She looked away. Daniel continued. You said you wanted to know one thing. Her eyes moved back to him. What? Daniel swallowed. You wanted to know whether Ethan had ever intended to come back. Ji-won stopped breathing. And what did you tell me? Daniel looked down. The truth. She waited. He did. A tear slid down her cheek. He wanted to. Yes. But you kept telling him not to. Yes. Ji-won's voice became smaller. Why? Daniel finally looked at her. Because I thought if Ethan came back and hurt you again. His voice broke. I wouldn't be able to forgive myself. Ji-won stared at him. But you could forgive yourself for making sure he never got the chance. Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. Ji-won understood now. Daniel's mistake hadn't been cruelty. It had been arrogance. The arrogance of believing that caring about someone gave you the right to choose for them. She looked down at the messages. Then asked, what did I say before I left? Daniel's face changed. You don't remember? No. You told me I had been protecting Ethan too. Ji-won's fingers tightened. What else? Daniel hesitated. She knew immediately it mattered. What? You said. He stopped. Ji-won's heart began pounding. Daniel. You said if Ethan ever came back. His eyes met hers. You didn't know if you would forgive him. Ji-won's face crumpled. Then Daniel added. But you said you wanted him to ask. Silence. Not forgive him. Not forget. Ask. The difference destroyed her. For years, Ethan had assumed leaving was what she needed. For years, Daniel had assumed silence was protection. But 6 years ago, Ji-won had wanted one simple thing. The chance to decide for herself. She covered her mouth. And suddenly, she remembered. Rain. The cafe. Daniel sitting across from her. Her own voice shaking. I'm not saying I forgive him. Daniel's younger face. Worried. Then her voice again. I just wanted him to come back and let me tell him what I wanted. Ji-won gasped. The memory disappeared as quickly as it had come. But this time it left something behind. Truth. She looked at Daniel. You knew? Yes. And after the accident? Daniel's expression broke. She already knew the answer. You knew I wanted him to come back. Yes. And you didn't tell him. No. Why? Daniel stared at her. For a long time. Then he whispered. Because when you woke up and didn't remember him, I thought maybe life had already made the choice we were all too afraid to make. Ji-won looked at him. And Daniel finally said the thing she had needed him to admit. I was wrong. She nodded slowly. Yes. He looked down. For the first time, Ji-won saw Daniel not as the calm man who always knew what to do, but as someone who had spent years carrying the consequences of a decision he had made when he was young and convinced he understood love. She stood. Daniel looked up. Where are you going? Ji-won picked up the envelope. I don't know. Ji-won. She paused. He looked terrified. And for once she understood why. What are you going to do? She looked at him. Then toward the rain beginning to fall outside. For the first time? Daniel waited. Ji-won's voice was quiet. I think I'm going to decide something without either of you helping me. She walked away. That night, Ethan received a message. He stared at Ji-won's name for nearly a minute before opening it. There were only 6 words. Tomorrow. 10 o'clock. The old bookstore. Ethan didn't sleep. Neither did Daniel. But Daniel wasn't invited. And for the first time since he had refused to be Ethan's best man, he understood that some stories could no longer be fixed by standing between two people. Sometimes the only thing left to do was step out of the way. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the bookstore 40 minutes early. He stood outside in the cold, staring through the glass doors. 6 years ago, this was where he had found her again. Ji-won. Older. Different. Standing between shelves, reading a book with the same serious expression she always wore when she was trying to decide whether something was worth her time. He had recognized her immediately. She hadn't recognized him. Because there had been nothing to recognize. The first time they had met, they barely knew each other. Still, he had introduced himself again. And somehow, she had given him another chance. Now Ethan wondered whether that chance had finally run out. At exactly 10 o'clock, Ji-won appeared. She wasn't wearing anything special. No engagement ring. No carefully chosen dress. Just jeans, a dark coat, and her hair tied loosely behind her. Ethan looked at her hand. The ring was gone. His heart sank. She noticed. You can stop looking. He looked away. I wasn't. You were. A painful smile crossed his face. Yes. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Ji-won looked toward the bookstore. Do you remember the first thing you said to me here? Ethan's eyes widened slightly. You remember? No. The hope disappeared immediately. Ji-won continued. But you told me. Ethan nodded. I said you were holding the book upside down. A small smile touched her lips. And I was. No. Her smile disappeared. I hated you immediately. He laughed. A real laugh. Quiet. Unexpected. For a second, it almost felt normal. Then Ji-won looked at him. And the warmth disappeared. Why didn't you tell me? Ethan knew she wasn't talking about the bookstore. He looked down. Because I was afraid. She nodded. I know. He looked up. I was afraid that if I told you, you'd feel like everything between us was built on a lie. Ji-won's eyes filled. It was. Ethan didn't defend himself. She continued. But the worst part wasn't that you knew me before. He listened. It was that you kept choosing for me. His throat tightened. I know. You left because you thought I would be better without you. Yes. You stayed away because you thought I was happier not remembering. Yes. And when we met again. His eyes filled. I was afraid of losing you. Ji-won stared at him. And now you have. Ethan's face broke. But she wasn't finished. I don't know if I forgive you. He nodded. I know. I don't know if I ever will. I understand. She took a breath. But I wanted to come here because I remembered something. Ethan went still. Ji-won looked toward the street. Not clearly. He waited. Just a feeling. She turned back to him. I remember being angry. Ethan didn't move. And I remember waiting. His eyes filled. Ji-won's voice trembled. I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if you had come back. Ethan stopped breathing. She held his gaze. So this is what happens now. He waited. We don't get married. His face fell. But. Ethan looked up. Ji-won took a slow breath. We start again. He stared at her. She continued. No engagement. He nodded. No wedding date. Another nod. And no secrets. His eyes filled completely. Okay. Ji-won looked at him. You don't get to promise me forever. He swallowed. What can I promise? She stepped closer. The truth. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Then opened them. The truth. For the first time since she had walked out of his apartment, Ji-won reached for his hand. Not as his fiancée. Not as the woman she had been 6 years ago. Not as a memory he was trying to get back. Just as herself. Ethan looked down at their hands. And Ji-won said quietly, if we're going to fall in love again. He looked at her. This time, you stay long enough for me to decide if I want you to. Ethan nodded. Tears slipped down his face. I will. Across the street, unnoticed by either of them, Daniel stood beside a parked car. He had come only to make sure Ji-won was safe. Nothing more. He saw Ethan take her hand. And for a second, the old instinct returned. The need to step in. To protect. To warn. To decide. Then Daniel remembered her words. I'm going to decide something without either of you helping me. He smiled sadly. And walked away. The first few weeks were harder than either of them expected. Starting again sounded simple when Ji-won said it outside the bookstore. It wasn't. Because starting again meant learning how to be around each other without pretending the past didn't exist. Ethan wanted to call her every morning. He didn't. Instead, he waited. The first day, Ji-won sent him a message at noon. Coffee? Ethan stared at the screen for almost a minute. Then he typed, only if you actually want coffee. Her reply came immediately. Don't ruin this already. For the first time in weeks, Ethan smiled. They met at a small cafe. They talked about work. The weather. A terrible movie Ji-won had watched. Nothing important. And somehow, that was the point. Ethan didn't bring up the accident. Ji-won didn't ask about the first time they fell in love. For 2 hours, they were simply two people learning whether they still liked each other when there was no wedding waiting at the end of it. And they did. Slowly. Carefully. Sometimes, Ethan would almost say something and stop himself. Ji-won noticed. What? He looked at her. Nothing. She raised an eyebrow. No secrets. He sighed. Then smiled. I was just thinking you still order the same thing. She looked down at her coffee. And? You hate cinnamon. Her expression changed. Ethan immediately realized what he'd done. Ji-won looked at him. How do you know that? He was quiet. Then he said, you told me. Her face softened. Which time? Ethan looked down. The second. She didn't speak for a while. Those moments still happened. Little reminders that there had been versions of them she couldn't remember. At first, Ji-won hated them. But slowly, she stopped seeing them as something Ethan was holding over her. They were simply memories. His memories. Until she had some of her own. One evening, Ethan walked her home. They stopped outside her building. Ji-won looked at him. "You can come up." Ethan's eyes widened slightly. Then she smiled. "For tea." He laughed. "I wasn't assuming anything." "Good." She opened the door. "Because I would hate to start over with you and discover you're annoying." Ethan followed her inside. "I think you've already discovered that." Upstairs, Ji-won made tea while Ethan stood awkwardly near the kitchen counter. She noticed. "You can sit down." "I know. You look terrified." "I am." Ji-won stopped. "Why?" Ethan looked at her. "Because the last time I was here, you asked me if I wanted to move in." The room became quiet. Ji-won's hands froze around the cup. Ethan immediately regretted saying it. But then she smiled faintly. "Apparently I move fast." "You really do." She looked at him. "And what did you say?" Ethan smiled. "I said yes before you finished asking." Ji-won laughed. A real laugh. And Ethan felt something inside him loosen. For once, remembering the past hadn't destroyed the present. A month passed. Then 2. Ethan never pressured her. He didn't mention the wedding. He didn't ask about the ring. He didn't tell her how long he was willing to wait. Because that would have been another decision disguised as patience. Instead, he stayed. That was all. And slowly, Ji-won began trusting him again. Daniel stayed away. Mostly. He sent Ji-won one message after their conversation. "I'm here if you need anything." She didn't respond. He didn't send another. Ethan noticed. One evening, while Ji-won was sitting beside him on the sofa, she suddenly asked, "Have you spoken to Daniel?" Ethan looked at her. "Not much." "Why?" He smiled sadly. "I think he's trying to decide whether he's allowed to breathe around us." Ji-won looked down. He was wrong. Yes. But he cared. Ethan nodded. He did. She was quiet. Then she said, "I think that's what makes it worse." Ethan looked at her. "What?" "He hurt me while trying to protect me." Ethan's expression changed. Ji-won realized. "I know." He nodded slowly. For once, neither of them needed to explain. Then one rainy Thursday evening, Ji-won's phone rang. Her mother's name appeared on the screen. Ji-won answered. "Mom." Her mother's voice was shaking. "Where are you?" Ji-won sat up. "At home." "With Ethan?" Ji-won looked toward him. "Yes." Her mother became quiet. Then she said, "You both need to come to the house." Ji-won's stomach tightened. "Why?" "Please." Her mother almost never said please. Ji-won stood. "What happened?" There was a long pause. Then her mother whispered, "I found something." 40 minutes later, Ji-won and Ethan were sitting in her mother's living room. Neither of them spoke. Ji-won's mother stood beside an old storage box. Her hands were trembling. "I was cleaning out your old things." Ji-won's chest tightened. Her mother pulled out a small digital recorder. Ethan went still. Ji-won looked at it. "What is that?" "I don't know," she replied. Ji-won frowned. "You don't know?" "I found it in one of your old boxes." She pressed the power button. Then she plugged it into a charger. Minutes passed. Ethan stared at the device as if it might explode. Ji-won's mother finally looked at them. "I almost threw it away." Ji-won's face changed. "Why didn't you?" Her mother gave a broken smile. "Because it had your handwriting on it." She turned the recorder over. A small label. 3 words. "Don't delete this." Ji-won's breath caught. Her mom pressed play. A voice. Ji-won's voice. Younger. Laughing. Ethan stopped breathing. Ji-won's fingers tightened around the sofa. The recording continued. "Okay, this is stupid." A man's voice laughed. Ji-won's eyes widened. "Ethan. But younger. Happier. You said you wanted to record it." Her voice answered. "I know, but now I hate it." Ethan covered his mouth. Ji-won stared at the recorder. Her own voice. A version of herself she had never heard before. The recording crackled. Then her voice said, "Fine. Future me, if you're listening to this." Ji-won's eyes filled. Ethan looked at her. The voice continued. "You probably think I'm dramatic." She laughed. Then Ethan's voice. "She is." Ji-won's past self gasped. "Excuse me?" Even Ji-won smiled. Then the recording changed. The laughter faded. Her voice became softer. More serious. But if you're listening to this because something happened. The room went still. Ethan's eyes widened. Ji-won slowly leaned forward. Her younger voice continued. I want you to know something. I was happy with him. Not because everything was perfect. Actually, he's terrible at apologizing. Ethan laughed through his tears. Ji-won's voice continued. And he overthinks everything. But I loved him. And the future me deserves to remember that. Ethan slowly looked up. Ji-won's tears were falling uncontrollably now. This is my decision, not anyone's. Ji-won froze. Her mother closed her eyes. Ethan looked like he'd been struck. The recording continued. Not my mom or Daniel. Ethan looked down. And especially not Ethan. Ji-won let out a sob. Her younger voice laughed softly. Then became serious again. If he's standing there and trying to leave because he thinks he's protecting me. Ethan covered his face. Ji-won watched him. Her voice continued. Tell him he's an idiot. A broken laugh escaped Ethan. Then, tell him if he ever runs away from me again. Ji-won leaned forward. Ethan looked at the recorder. The entire room waited. Her younger self finished. I'll find him myself. The recording ended. Ji-won stared at the recorder. 6 years. 6 years of wondering. 6 years of Ethan believing he had done the right thing by disappearing. 6 years of Daniel believing silence was safer. And somewhere, somehow, Ji-won had left herself the one thing neither of them had been able to give her. Her own choice. She stood up. Ethan looked terrified. Ji-won walked toward him. He immediately wiped his face. Ji-won. She stopped in front of him. He looked up. I heard it, he whispered. Yes. I know I don't deserve. Stop. Ethan froze. Ji-won took a breath. Then she said, I'm not going to forgive you because of a recording. His face fell. But I'm also not going to pretend I didn't hear what she said. Ethan nodded slowly. Ji-won looked toward the recorder. Then back at him. She loved you. His eyes filled. Yes. So much that even after everything. Her voice cracked. She still wanted the right to choose you. Ethan couldn't speak. Ji-won stepped closer. But she isn't here. He looked confused. Ji-won placed her hand against her own chest. I am. That was the difference. She wasn't the woman from 6 years ago. She wasn't the woman from the first time they met. She was Ji-won now. A woman who knew exactly how dangerous it was to let someone else decide her future. Ethan looked at her. What are you saying? Ji-won smiled through her tears. I'm saying I'm glad she left me that recording. His face softened. But... She took a slow breath. But I want to make my own memories with you. Ethan stared. She continued. Not because I promised you something before. His tears began falling again. Not because fate keeps bringing us back together. He couldn't look away from her. But because right now. Ji-won reached for his hand. Knowing everything I know. She squeezed it. I still want to see what happens if you stay. Ethan's face broke. He nodded. This time, when he pulled her into his arms, Ji-won didn't feel like she was returning to something she had forgotten. She felt like she was choosing something new. And for the first time, Ethan understood the difference between being forgiven and being given another chance. 3 months later, Daniel stood outside Ji-won's apartment. He had been staring at the door for 5 minutes. Then it opened. Ji-won stood there. Daniel immediately straightened. I can leave. She almost smiled. You always say that. He looked down. This time, I mean it. Ji-won studied him. Then stepped aside. Come in. Daniel hesitated. Are you sure? No. He looked up. Ji-won gave him a small smile. But I'm deciding to try anyway. Daniel's eyes filled. He stepped inside. Ethan was sitting in the living room. The three of them froze. Daniel looked toward him. Ethan stood. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Daniel said, I was wrong. Ethan nodded. So was I. Daniel looked at Ji-won. She folded her arms. Good. We're finally getting somewhere. For the first time in months, all three of them laughed. Awkwardly. But it was something. And that was how it started. Not with forgiveness. Not with everything suddenly going back to normal. But with 3 people finally telling the truth. Months later, Ethan asked Ji-won to dinner. She knew something was strange the moment they arrived at the restaurant. It was empty. She turned toward him. Ethan. He looked nervous. Very nervous. Ji-won narrowed her eyes. What did you do? Nothing. That's not true. He smiled. Then reached into his pocket. Ji-won's breath caught. Don't. Ethan froze. Her eyes widened. Oh my God. Ji-won. You're doing it. He laughed nervously. I was hoping you wouldn't notice. She covered her face. I specifically said no wedding. I know. Her eyes moved to his hand. Then why is there a ring? Ethan looked at it. Then back at her. Because I wanted to ask you something. Ji-won slowly lowered her hands. He didn't kneel. He stayed exactly where he was. Looking at her. No audience. Just the two of them. I don't want to ask you to marry me today. Ji-won blinked. What? Ethan smiled. I know. Terrible use of a ring. She laughed through tears. Then he continued. I just wanted to ask if, someday. His voice became quieter. When you decide you're ready. He held out the ring. Would you let me ask again? Ji-won stared at him. No promises. No date. No wedding plan before she had even said yes. Just a question. And for once. Ethan was asking before deciding. Ji-won's eyes filled. She reached for the ring. Then shook her head. Ethan's face fell. She smiled. Not yet. He let out a breath. Then nodded. Okay. She looked at him. Ask me again when you're ready to hear whatever answer I give you. Ethan smiled. I am. Ji-won stepped closer. Good. She kissed him. He didn't think about the memories she had lost. He thought only about the woman standing in front of him. The one who knew everything now. And still hadn't walked away. 2 years later, Ji-won stood in front of a mirror. Her wedding dress hung around her. White. Simple. Nothing like the first one. Her mother stood behind her. Tears already filling her eyes. Ji-won caught her reflection. You're crying already? Her mother laughed. I've been crying for 20 minutes. Ji-won turned around. This time, there were no secrets. Her mother had told her everything she remembered. Everything she had done wrong. And Ji-won had listened. Forgiveness had taken time. But eventually, she had learned something important. Love didn't always make people wise. Sometimes, the people who loved you most were the ones capable of hurting you because they believed they were doing the right thing. The difference was whether they learned. Her mother had. A knock came at the door. Ji-won turned. Daniel stepped inside. He was wearing a black suit. Ji-won smiled. You look uncomfortable. I hate formal clothes. You've worn worse. He looked at her. Then his eyes filled. Ji-won sighed. Not you too. Daniel laughed. Then looked down. I almost wasn't going to come in. Why? He smiled sadly. Habit. Ji-won walked toward him. You're allowed to be here. Daniel nodded. I know. She adjusted his tie. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel whispered. Are you sure? Ji-won looked at him. About Ethan? He nodded. She smiled. Yes. Daniel's eyes filled. And for the first time, his question didn't feel like interference. Because he wasn't deciding for her. He was asking. Ji-won took his hand. Come on. Outside, Ethan stood at the altar. He looked older now. Calmer. Still nervous. Daniel walked toward him. Ethan looked surprised. Then smiled. Daniel stopped beside him. You still don't have to be here, Ethan whispered. Daniel looked at him. I know. Then Daniel smiled. That's why I can be. Ethan's eyes filled. Ji-won appeared at the entrance. The music started. She looked at Ethan. And then at Daniel. Both men watched her. Neither moved. Neither chose for her. They simply waited. And Ji-won smiled. Because after everything, that was all she had ever wanted. The right to walk forward on her own. She took her first step. Then another. Not because she had forgotten the past. Not because she believed fate would protect her from heartbreak. But because she finally understood something. Love wasn't proven by finding your way back to someone over and over again. Love was proven by what you did. Once you found them. Ethan looked at her with tears in his eyes. Ji-won reached him. And before the ceremony began, she whispered. You stayed. Ethan smiled. Always. And this time, she believed him.